throughout this very diverse set of experiences, from Stanford and Utah State to running your own firm after Harvard, this internship in Washington, D.C., what are some of the leadership lessons that you've taken away?
Well, one lesson, first of all, is do the right thing. You know, that goes back to the point about Watergate and Enron. And I think most kids who come to Utah State want to do the right thing. But I would also say that, you know, the world is complex, and when I was just starting out, I didn't understand the way the world worked, and that was one of the things that was a big driver for me, was this curiosity to try to understand how the world worked, and then to try to imagine the kinds of ethical challenges that you might come to grips with before they happen, so that you could to anticipate what might be a challenge to your own integrity. And so I would say number one is do the right thing. The second thing I would say is that leaders try to make the world a better place than it currently is. You know, I think the first and probably the starting point of leadership is to see the world as it is, not as you'd like it to be, and yourself as you are, not as you might aspire to be. So seeing reality as it is and confronting that reality in a very honest and direct way is the first step. The second step is to imagine a future that never was or currently isn't. An aspiration, in other words, an audacious goal. And then to figure out a way to get from where we are to where we're trying to be. You know, Robert Kennedy famously said, "Some people see the world as it is and ask why. I see the world as it never was and ask why not." I actually think you have to do both, and then you have to develop a plan for moving reality from what it is to what it could be. And every single day, I ask myself, how can we get better faster? How can we get better finances? How can we get better facilities? How can we get better faculty? How can we get better students? How can we get a better brand so that we can be proud of our school and so that we can really make a difference in society by developing leaders who will make this world a better place. So I think the idea of confronting reality as it is, fashioning an aspiration, having an urgent sense of energy about making change happen, and then, of course, doing it in a way that others will want to follow you and be part of it.
Those are some great lessons. So let me just shift for my final question, and we'll open up to the audience a little bit more about the mechanics of career. So how do you hire? What are you looking for?
You know, I think this is one of the most important questions as a leader that you can have, because one of the things that I noticed in my consulting career was that we were able to help companies like Chrysler, for example, make a big shift. But if you don't hire the right people, if you don't get the right culture going, that you could have a big shift and it can then collapse. You know, there's a law of entropy in organizations, just like there is a law of entropy in nature. And what that means is that you have to continually stay at it, continually work at it. So I think the most important thing is to hire people who are going to be carriers of the culture that you're trying to create, who are going to hardwire and help you hardwire the culture into the organization so that the culture continues to focus on excellence and impact and continuous improvement and service and making a positive difference long after you're gone as a leader. And one of the things that I was most impressed by when I went back to Harvard this last semester was the culture. You know, people would ask me all the time, "Doug, how's things changed since you were here before?" And my answer was, I'm more impressed by what hasn't changed than what has changed. And what hadn't changed was the culture of excellence at the place. It still is really, really strong. The culture of teaching excellence, the culture of focus on student success, the culture of participation in the classrooms, the culture of colleagueship. All of that is as strong as it ever was when I was there, and even stronger. And if I have one hope for us here at the Huntsman School, is that we hardwire a culture that puts student success as our top priority, and makes a strive for excellence, a desire to get better and better over time, and a desire to focus on how we can serve as an engine of growth for our community, the state, the nation, and the world. Make that culture hardwired and impervious of change, so that the people that get hired here are going to be hired first and foremost for whether or not they are supporters of that kind of a culture.
So let me just last follow up. So what kind of questions would you ask? These students are going to go out over the next several years and are going to run across lots of different opportunities for their careers. They're going to sit down in interviews. So what kind of questions do you ask in an interview when you're thinking about hiring somebody?
Well, Stephen Covey, you know, Dave, he spent his last 2.5 years of his life as the first John M. Huntsman Professor of Leadership here at the Huntsman School of Business. And Stephen was a great friend and a great model for me. And Stephen always suggested that if you want a great career, you start first and foremost by asking yourself, what are your strengths? What are you passionate about? What's the world's great need that you can help serve? And what is your conscience telling you? And so he would advise people when they were going to apply for jobs to do their homework and figure out what was the company's need and how could you fit there? What kind of a contribution could you make to the corporation? So I try to assess when I'm interviewing somebody whether they have a service orientation. You know, are they climbing the ladder of success because they have a really narrow definition of what their purpose is? Or do they have a sense of purpose that goes beyond self? Are they looking to be aligned behind a great and noble purpose that they can contribute to that's bigger than themselves? So I am probing to try to find out whether that contribution ethic is a sincerely held point of view from the people that we hire. I'm more interested in that than talent. I let other people in the Huntsman School try to figure out whether the folks are talented. I assume that they don't come to me. They don't get to an interview with me without being talented. So I'm really looking for their values.
Great. So we have about 10, 15 minutes left, and we've got people in the back with some mics. I'll open it up to the audience for any questions for Dean Anderson on leadership. Raise your hands and it'll come to you. And if you don't ask questions, I'll just keep asking them. You don't want that.
What are some of your favorite books that you've read on leadership that you would recommend to us?
Well, you know, it's interesting. There are so many books that are about leadership, but they aren't necessarily leadership books. There's a gazillion books on leadership out there, but I sometimes like to find inspiration in novels and in plays and in history books. So, for example, the Huntsman Scholars this year are going to go to England, and I get to go with them. Somebody said the dean, needs to go with them. The fact is that I get to go to England with them. And I'm going to spend a day with them talking about a great book. It's a play by Robert Bolt called Man for All Seasons. It was made into a movie in the mid-1960s starring Paul Scofield, who won the Academy Award. It's about Thomas More, Sir Thomas More, who was Chancellor of England. At the time, Henry VIII passed the law of supremacy through Parliament that divided the Church of England from the Catholic Church and the Pope of Rome so that he could marry Anne Boleyn. It's a great book. There's so many leadership lessons in that book. that I encourage you to read it. It's a quick read, and to see the movie, which is wonderfully made. Now, interestingly enough, there's a more recent book about the Henry Thomas More conflict that involves Thomas Cromwell, who was another important actor in that scene. It's called Wolf Hall. Have any of you heard about Wolf Hall? Okay, Wolf Hall is by a woman by the name of Hilary Mantel. She has 2 books, Wolf Hall and Bringing Up the Bodies. These are novels, but she reimagines the whole Thomas More Henry scenario from a completely different perspective, from the perspective of Thomas Cromwell, who is an evil villain in Robert Bolt's play, and her turns out to be quite a sympathetic character in Hilary Mantel's rendering. It's so interesting to read both perspectives, and I'm not prepared to give up either. I love them both. I love both representations because they share different aspects of possibility that causes you to think about the world in different ways. It goes back to what I was talking about earlier about seeing the world as it is. And I think it's important to try to see the world through other people's eyes. And that's what these 2 books, in contrast to each other, do. They challenge you to see the world in different eyes. Right at that time, by the way, Machiavelli was writing his famous book about leadership called The Prince, which again is another classic book on leadership that I'd encourage you all to read. Basically, Machiavelli was famous for the dictum, the ends justify the means. And so you have to ask yourself the question, do the ends justify the means? And I was stumped by that question when I was your age. I really wasn't sure how to answer it. And I remember when I got to graduate school at Harvard, I asked one of my major professors that question to see how he would respond. And his answer was, if the ends don't justify the means, what does? And that took me in a completely different way. So I give you those examples of literature, but there are so many others. Have any of you read the novel The Remains of the Day? Remains of the Day? It's a wonderful novel by a Japanese guy who was raised in England about a butler serving in a great house in England in the interwar period. And his boss, the lord of the manor who he serves, happens to be very favorably disposed to the Germans and is trying to help find a way so that England can have a better relationship with Germany right at the time that Hitler is rising into power. And the sad fact of the case was this lord of the manor, along with a lot of other British noble people, kind of got headed down the wrong track with respect to Hitler, and they were on the wrong side of history, let me put it that way. And yet this butler felt that it was his most noble and highest aspiration to be the perfect butler. The reason I cite that as a potential leadership lesson is because the author of the book basically was creating the idea that we are all, to a certain extent, butlers. And the question is, who are we serving? And are the purposes of the people that we are serving really the purposes that we ought to be serving? And again, it goes to the core issues of leadership, which is, who are you? Who am I? What is the fundamental purpose that I exist to serve? And the importance of always examining that question.
Great. We have time for one question, 2 questions.
How have you seen the typical student that comes through the John Huntsman School of Business evolve over the last 10 years in your tenure as dean?
Great question. Thanks for that. I love the way in which you all are approaching your studies these days. I do get a sense that there's a greater sense of aspiration in the Huntsman School of Business, a greater sense of owning your own education, a sense of energy and enthusiasm about the possibility that you could create and shape your own destiny. And I see this changing. I think it was there. I think it was latent before, but I think the culture that we're creating is both attracting a higher standard, better students, and I think it's expecting more of the students. You know, we have the Dare Mighty Things motto up. That wasn't here 10 years ago. Our faculty are, I believe, setting a higher expectation in their teaching. Students at Utah State University are capable of being as good as any students in the country, but they have to understand what the standards are, and they have to own the responsibility of doing the hard work to get there. And I think the students are evolving that way. I'm really very, very proud of all of you and what you're doing.
Ben, let's have you ask the last question.
In your experience of hiring so many employees, what are some of the characteristics that you've seen of the leaders the employees that you've hired that have become leaders? What are some of the characteristics that made them an effective leader?
It is true that we've hired a lot of people here at the Huntsman School in the last 10 years. When I became dean, there were 72 full-time faculty members. Only 22 of those 72 still are with us. In other words, 50 are gone. And I will tell you, it's been a refreshing change. We had, at the time I hired, it started out here, 37 staff people, and only 7 of those staff are still here. We have increased our faculty by 1/3. We've added 24 additional faculty over that period of time, and we've hired 23 additional staff people. So we have 60 staff now and 96 faculty. So 77% of the faculty are new since July 1st, 2006, and 88% of the staff are new since July 1st, 2006. The people who succeed here at the Huntsman School are people who will live our values and who will be carriers of our values, who will express those values in virtually everything they do and the way in which they act. They will model those values. You know, Gandhi famously said, "Be the change that you want to see in the world." That means you've got to model the behavior and exemplify that behavior. So what Dr. Larry Walther did was modeling that kind of behavior, setting high expectations, holding people accountable for them, allowing them to get the support that they need so that they can reach the challenges that we place. We say any mistake made leaning in the direction of student success is a forgivable mistake at the Huntsman School. Any mistake leaning in the direction of faculty or administrative convenience may or may not be a forgivable mistake. And we expect people to live those values, and we hold them accountable. So those who succeed are those who live the values.
Great. Thanks very much, Doug.
Thank you. Great pleasure being with you.